All right, so two articles that I want to talk about. One from the National Post and another report from RBC. So the National Post saying from Toronto to Vancouver to Ottawa, the housing slowdown is spreading. And then from RBC, the special housing report, Canada isn't in a housing start slump, but Ontario is. So let's dive into it. So, just a breakdown of what both of these articles are saying. Canada overall built over 1 million homes in the last 4 years. Many provinces still building a lot in 2025. But Ontario and BC, building is down, especially in the GTA since mid 2024. Alberta and Atlantic Canada are up. Saskatchewan and Quebec rising, but Manitoba is steady. Sales collapsing since 2022. The GTA down 89%, Vancouver down 77%, Ottawa down 51%, as fewer new builds next. Okay, 2025, many homes are already under construction, about 93,000 in the GTA, move-ins still coming. 2026 risk. If new projects don't start now, move-ins will drop later. So what they're saying here is, there are a lot of parts of Canada that are still seeing strong starts happening, but not in some of the more expensive pockets, cities, Canada. So the risk is, if these come to a complete stop, we'll see that debt build up in the system for later on. So probably more 27, 28. Not going to have anything coming to market. They might start building properties again, but we all know that it can take 2 to 5 to 6 years to get those back onto the market. That's why you always want consistently projects in the pipeline, and a good amount of projects in the pipeline to make sure that communities are always going to have enough housing coming online in the future. So why Ontario isn't starting? Well, the high interest rates, high building costs, city fees, development fees, and all that. There's way more resale homes on the market, and they're all competing, trying to sell their properties as the amount of active listings are piling up. There's jobs and tax risks. So in the GTA alone, there's 41,000 jobs that could be impacted by just how few starts have been happening there. And also these municipalities, these governments are going to potentially bring in $6 billion a year less. So what helps? Both sources agree, talking about the National Post and the RBC, that temporary cuts to the GST and HST on new or renovated homes, and also fixed spread out development charges, GST and HST relief for rentals being built, and more CMHC apartment loan funding. So they're coming out, both these reports are coming out and saying, hey, listen, these are some of the implementations that you guys need to make to start getting more properties built. And it's not that Canada isn't as a whole seeing more properties being built. It's the fact that these specific communities are not seeing them, which will lead to issues later on. And when it comes down to supply and demand, we're seeing that there's a ton of supply and less demand. We're starting to see prices go down. The concern is 27, 28, 29, when you haven't had all these properties get built, all of a sudden, nothing new coming into the pipeline, the demand is going to shift the other way. We're going to get back into bidding wars. It's just this vicious cycle that we're on. So we always need to make sure that, okay, if we need to adjust policy to ensure that we're building enough homes so we don't keep going into markets where there's these crazy bidding wars every X amount of years. Trust me, as a real estate agent, I don't want that. I want people to be able to transact homes, buy a home, sell a home, move in 5 years, these markets are extremely difficult for the buyers, for the sellers, and for the agents. So the more supply we get on the market, the better it is for everybody. And I hope that the governments, the federal, municipal, and the provincial, start working together to make sure that we've got enough supply in the market for everybody. So look, this is the Canadian housing starts, which was just updated, and we can see that been 3 other times since where we've seen this many starts. So there is a ton of starts. A lot of these, probably around 50% of them, are rentals, but there is strength there. The only problem is we're not seeing that in Ontario. So let's look at the Ontario housing starts seriously lag the rest of Canada, and this is from RBC Economics. So what we're looking at is housing starts in the thousands, seasonally adjusted and annualized on a 6-month moving average. And we can see the blue line for the rest of Canada accelerating to the upside. The rest of Canada is building all these new either rentals or homes. And we can see Ontario, they've dipped considerably. We're at a low that we haven't seen since 2018, 2020. Building a lot more properties earlier on. But when people are coming to Canada, like the Ontario are growing significantly faster, than a lot of other areas in Canada. So we should see the bulk, or not the bulk, but at least moving to the upside in Ontario for new starts. And we're just not seeing that right now. All right, so when we go over to the Ontario construction costs, they've grown the most in Canada in Ontario. And so when we look at residential building construction price index, so 2008 starts fresh at 100, and we can see that in Ontario, it's gone up to 187.8 on the index, and on Canada as a whole, 15 different cities on the CMA composite, you're looking at 173.9. So just look at how much the cost of construction has gone up. This is land, this is insurance, this is materials, and this is labor, and this is taxes. This is all accelerated the price. So, a lot of people saying that prices need to down to pre-pandemic levels, but the only problem is the cost to build those existing structures is significantly higher. So when the replacement cost is that much more, you can't get back to pre-pandemic levels. Because no one would build, no one could build because of the that's associated with doing so. All right, let's look at the Toronto condo starts. They're plummeting with no end in sight. So if we look at the blue line, this is the amount of condo starts where we peaked out over 30. I'm assuming that's 30,000. And when we look at the yellow line, which is pre-construction sales 18 months earlier, we can see that that's completely non-existent now, basically. And the starts are starting to follow the trend that we saw 18 months earlier with the pre-construction sales. And then let's jump into the larger supply of homes for sale, dampens demand for new builds in Ontario. So what we're looking at basically here is the yellow line is the active listings for the rest of Canada as compared to Ontario. So typically it's accelerated onto the high side, and there's a large gap between the amount of homes for sale in Canada as compared to versus what's for sale in Ontario. But that really narrowed come 2022. We had a lot of people move out of cities and move to the East Coast, the West Coast, in all different places, sold their properties here, moved out to places that were a little bit more affordable where their money could stretch out a little bit further. So because of that, we're not seeing a lot of properties put back on the market in other places in Canada. So this is why we're getting a large influx of new properties being built because there's still a lot of people that want to live out in those communities, and there's just not enough housing for them right now. Whereas on the other side, we are seeing, we haven't seen since the early 2010s of active listings. So the construction is competing against those active listings, and that is why that's something to do with the reason it's been suppressed. The other is the cost, which we just looked at. So yeah, that's the breakdown of those two different articles. If you've got any questions or concerns about where the market's at as a buyer, as a seller, as an investor, you can always reach out to Dylan or myself, and we'd be happy to get back to you with any questions and answers to those questions. Take care, guys.